Expose to the left, expose to the right, expose for the highlights, expose for the shadows. Oh my gosh, you've blown your highlights. You've crushed your blacks, dude. You know what? You better take a look at your histogram. If you don't know everything that I just said, if you don't understand it all, well, you're in luck, because today I'm going to make you a better photographer. Before we get started, don't forget to check out my podcast. It's called Photobomb, and it's available anywhere that podcasts are found. I guarantee you will have a good time listening to this podcast. Also, join my group on Facebook. It's called Pro Photo Talk with Booray. It's a great community of photographers. We're always helping each other out and asking each other for advice, so we'd love to have you there. Just find us on Facebook, Pro Photo Talk at Booray. Pro Photo Talk with Booray Perry. Just look in the description there. All the links are right there. Okay, so this is a hard video to make. I went back and forth on it because this is one of those areas that once you go down the rabbit hole of exposure and you start talking about exposure and the Instagram and your blacks and your whites and your highlights and so forth, that you can end up with what starts out as a 5-minute video being a 30-minute video. So I really wanted to try and condense it down and just hit a few key points, but at the same time, I want you to understand everything that I'm talking about, because I really think that being a good photographer really can hinge on understanding photography. I know that the more I came to understand photography, the better photographer I became. If for no other reason than it gave me confidence. You know, truly understanding photography will give you confidence every time you pick up a camera, and there is no substitution for having confidence when you're taking a picture. It frees up your mind to be creative because you're not trying to figure out how something works, or just, worrying that actually you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing, right? So understanding photography is one of the best things you can do for your photography. So today we're going to talk about exposing to the left and the right, and highlights and blacks, and crushing up your shadows, and all of this other stuff. And we're going to talk about how it ties into the histogram and how the histogram works as well. So let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. We're going to go straight to some images so that I can show you in real time exactly what we're talking about. No discussion about exposure can be had without first talking about the histogram. And I'm going to be honest, it took me a while to wrap my head around the histogram. I think I truly, really began to understand it about 5 minutes ago before I started making this video. Because it can be confusing. Well, listen, I'm going to tell you how it can be confusing. I'm going to show you right now. All right, this is your histogram over here, left side of the screen in that corner. And this is the image that we're looking at. So your histogram is showing you the areas of light and dark pixels in your image. All of them. All the areas of white pixels, all the areas of dark, and everything in between. It's just a graph. It's just telling you how many pixels in the image are pure white. How many pixels in the image are completely black, and everything in between. So light is on the right side. Dark is on the left side. So if you look here, this corner, the far left corner right here, this is the blackest, darkest pixel you can have. And on the far right corner right here is the pure white pixel. Now look here at this graph. You can see that the line, this is, the higher the line is, the more pixels you have that are that brightness, right, or darkness. And you can see that there's quite a few pixels that are at this level right here. But then it starts to drop off before it gets to the very end. The whitest part, this is the whitest part, and it drops off. Which means there may not be a single pixel in this image that is pure white. It's stepped in just a little bit. So the whitest pixel in this image isn't pure white. And then as you get more and more pixels, you see we're moving more and more to the left. And so the pixels are getting less and less pure white. And the reason that these lines are different colors is they represent different colors, in the image. But we're talking about how bright they are, bright blue, the lightness of the image when we look at these lines. Now, if you go down to this end, you're going to see, look, this is pure black, and look at the spike. huge spike right there. And it's telling you that there are a lot of pixels in this image that are pure black. Now, almost every image is going to have at least one pixel that's pure black and at least one pixel that's pure white. When you adjust the levels in your image, often that's what you're doing. You'll have an image that doesn't have a single thing in it that's pure black. And you need that. If you have something that's pure black and something that's pure white at the other end, you end up with nice contrast in the image. Areas of light and dark, it gives you a nice three-dimensional look to your image. So you're going to usually have some pure whites and your pure blacks. But if you have a lot, if you have a spike at either end of your histogram, it means you have a lot. And if you have a lot and they're close to each other, then you get big black patches in your image, which is what we have here. Look to this side and you'll see there are sections here that are completely black. And if you watch over here on the left-hand side, every time I put the cursor over the image, you'll see it shows me exactly what I'm looking at on the Instagram, where they are on the scale. And you can see, let me see if I can go to where it's actually, get it in there, because the cursor is actually showing more than one pixel. But you can see that if you find an area that's completely black, like this, it's going to, boom, it's really going to go hard left. And you can see this is a completely black part of the image and you can't see any detail whatsoever. And by the same contrast, if we go to an image where we've overexposed it, you're going to see a huge spike at the white end. And this huge spike is here. See, anywhere I go in here, look, it's a far right end spike of my histogram. That histogram is telling me you have some sections of your image, dude, that are pure white, and you have a lot of them. See how high it is? You have a lot of them, and here they are, all right here. Which brings us to the question of all those terms that I used at the start of the video. So when someone says exposed to the right or exposed to the left, and this is where it gets confusing. If you said to me, this image, for example, is this exposed to the left or exposed to the right? My first instinct would be to say, this is exposed to the right. See how it's got these higher things on the right? But that's not true. When you say exposed to the right, what you're saying is do not have your image be spiked at the right. You're saying expose so that the right side of your image, the right side of your histogram is correct. This is incorrect. In order for it to be correct, it would need to look like this. This is closer to correct. So this image we have exposed to the right. Exposed to the right and saved the highlights. And on this image, we have exposed to the left and saved the dark areas of the image. And that's the hardest thing for me. If I look at this and you said, just off the top of my head, what's this, exposed left or right? I say, well, this is exposed left. See all the spiky over here? No, it's exposed right because this is correct. This is wrong. This is correct. This is exposed to the right to give you the correct amount of brightness and pixels in the bright area of the image. Now, what happens if you expose to the right and you end up with this happening over here? Then you have crushed your blacks. Or they will say you've clipped them. You've clipped your blacks or you've crushed your blacks. I think my dog has something to say about that. So this is a crushed or a clipped black. And if you go the other way with it, then you have blown your highlights. Blown your highlights. I'm going to shut the dog up and I'll be right back. All right, so we talked about crushed blacks. We talked about blown highlights. We did talk about blown highlights, right? This is your blown highlight right here. We talked about clipped blacks. We talked exposing to the left and exposing to the right. So all those terms I said at the very top, now you know what those terms mean. But knowing what those terms mean, well, that only helps you if you know how to use them and put them into a practical application, how to use them to make your photography better. Just understanding how to read the histogram, that's only part of the battle. The other part of the battle is how do I put this into practice? And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So every time you're shooting, whenever you're shooting, especially when you're in a situation where it's really bright or it's really dark, you have to make a decision as a photographer. What do you want to save? Do you want to save the highlights or do you want to save the shadows? So here we are on the beach. The groom is waiting for his bride to come down the aisle, and I am taking a picture of this groom. And before I even take this picture, I have to make a decision because I'm looking at him and I know he is much darker. His suit is much darker. His skin is much darker than that bright, bright sky behind him. Which one of those two things is important to me? And I know it's him. I need his expression. I need his face. I need his suit. It'd be nice if I could see the beautiful blue sky and clouds behind him, but that's not what I need. That's not why I'm taking this picture. It's him I need to save. So for him, I want to expose for the shadows. I want to expose to the left. I want to expose to save the shadows part of my image, which is his face and his suit. So I don't even know if I can do this because this is a JPEG, but let's see if I turn down the exposure there. And I can't even save this guy. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So let's go back to here. So in this image, I am exposing to the left. I am saving my shadows so that nothing is completely black and I can see what's going on here. But as a result, I am blowing out my highlights. Another image, same thing. I'm exposing to the left in order to save my shadows, and as a result, I am blowing out my highlights in this image. And when I get on the beach, I will typically set my camera to +1 or +2 exposure right off the bat, because I know that nothing on this beach is going to be as bright as the sky and the sand, and the sky and the sand are not as important to me as the people. So I know I'm going to have to expose to the left and save those highlights by boosting my exposure and making my images brighter so that the people look decent. But it's not always that way. For this image, I'm exposed in the opposite direction. I'm exposed to the right. I want to save these highlights. I want to see all this detail in the beautiful sunset. So I'm exposing for the sunset, which means they go completely black. They go completely dark. It's a silhouette. I meant to do a silhouette, but it's a good example of how you can't save everything. You can't save everybody. You have to make a call. And on this one, the sky was more important than the people. So I exposed to the right and I saved my highlights. But I lost my people. So how do you do both? How do you save the highlights and the people both at the same time? That's where we bring a flash into play. So now you can see for this image, what I did was I exposed to the right over here. I saved my highlights so that my sky didn't didn't blow out, right? And then I put a flash on these people, which brought up my shadows. Without this flash, they go dark. And you can see the same thing here. I exposed for my sky to save my highlights, and then I lit them to save my shadows. Which brings us to the big question you're asking, which is, Booray, what makes you think that I care about all this intense technical stuff that you just described to me? It's just, oh my gosh, it's too much math, Booray. I don't need all this stuff. Can't you just give me like a quick fix? Can't you just give me like this is the setting I should use? Well, no, I can't, because everything is situational. But I can tell you that when in doubt, you should expose for the highlights. Save the highlights, expose to the right. Expose to the right. Yeah. See, even now I have to remind myself. Expose to the right. Save the highlights. And here's why. Digital cameras, unlike film's completely different. Digital cameras are much better at recovering a dark area of an image than they are recovering a light area of an image. So if you're looking at, say, a dark area image like this, and here, this image, we have saved the highlights. Boy, have we. Look, wow, we don't have anything white. But this is on purpose. I did this on purpose so I'd have a very dark image to try and recover. But this is actually underexposed. These should be a little bit more over here. But you can see we really exposed to save this sky, right? Save our highlights. Great. So we underexposed to save our highlights, and then this went completely black. But now, if I go over here and I raise the exposure, now the whole image is going to look terrible. This is blown out, okay? But we're talking about we would do this, with a brush or whatever. But let's just go, here we go. Let's go to the black area. Now watch this. I'll raise this exposure. And look, there is a ton of detail in here that we can recover. And it's still there. We can save the dark areas of this image. That's like almost 3 stops. We can go even higher. And we're saving a lot of detail here. This is 3.8 stops. A lot of detail, and it looks fantastic. So this is what happens when we try to recover the shadows. Now, what if it's the other way around? What if the shadows are already? What if we shot for the shadows and now we need to recover the white areas? Guess what? If we bring down the exposure to recover the light areas, watch what happens to the sky. Where's my clouds? Where's my clouds? All we did was make this big white area, we just made it gray. We didn't recover anything. When we did it over here on the dark areas, we recovered all this detail, but not here, not on the white areas. And the reason is because, and this is kind of technical, the reason is because when a pixel fills up with light, it fills up with photons, when it's completely full, which means that pixel's white, there is no way for you to recover detail because it's completely full. You can't recover detail. There's no detail to be recovered. But when a pixel is not full at all, which means it's completely black, there's no pixels in it, there's no photons in it, there is a way to recover it. And the reason you can still recover it is because there are photons in the pixel, it's just that the camera can't read them. There's a minimum amount of pixels that have to be in the photon. I keep reversing that. There's a minimum amount of photons that have to be in the pixel before the camera can even read them. So let's pick some number. Let's say it's 20. So you have 20, if you have 19 photons that hit that pixel, the camera just says, this is black. If you have 20, then it starts to go, oh, a little gray. And then the more you have, the grayer it is. So if it's taken a picture of your image and everything in your image is black, there's a big black area, it doesn't mean there aren't pixels there. It just means that the camera, when it produced the image, could not read those pixels. But if you go in and you boost the exposure here, you're turning up the gain and saying, I need you to dig down and see what else you've got there in that receptor. It's going to find those pixels. It's going to find those photons, and it's going to show you detail. Now, this is very, very technical. The bottom line is this. The bottom thing that you need to remember is that when in doubt, you can recover the dark areas of your image better than you can recover the light areas of your image. I know that this has been a lot of technical talk and that I haven't necessarily presented it in the most technical way, but it's because I want you to try and understand it. And I really do think that understanding it can be vital to helping you be a better photographer. So hopefully you might have to watch the video 1 or 2 times to really wrap your head around the idea. But the bottom line is, as I said before, with a modern digital camera, when in doubt, it is usually better for your image to be too dark than to be too light. Because if it's blown out, if it's very, very light and blown out, you will not be able to recover as much information as you can if it's too dark and you have to recover information. And you know how you know that that's true? Because that's the way the cameras work. Right, so I'm going to put a link right here to a video I made about the dynamic range settings on Fuji cameras. I'm a Fuji shooter. And if you watch that video, you'll see that the way that they recover areas in Fuji cameras, if you set your dynamic range to say 200 or 400, what the camera actually does is it underexposes the image so that it saves the highlights. And then it boosts the dark areas in the camera to recover the dark areas. It doesn't go the other way. It doesn't overexpose, blow out the highlights, and then try and save them. No. It knows it can't do that. Instead, what it does is it underexposes, crushes or clips the blacks, and then tries to recover them. That's why, when in doubt, with a digital camera, underexpose. And if you're a film shooter, which I'm sure you're not a film shooter, because if you are, you probably don't even own a computer. But if you are, then you know probably that it's exactly the opposite if you shoot film. And I can make a whole video about that because it's fascinating to me how film is completely different than digital in what you have to. With film, you have to save the dark areas because you can recover the light areas. But with digital, you have to save the light areas because you can recover the dark areas. And the reason why is, to me, fascinating. I might make a video about that. If you think I should, put a note in the comments and I'll make a video about it. All right, that's it. Don't forget, check out my podcast. Throw me a like, throw me a comment, and please throw me a subscription. And don't forget, all the gear that I use is listed right down there in the description. And if you use those links, I get $1 or $2, and it helps me to keep this channel alive. We'll see you next time.